Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I got another returning guest on the line, someone I think you're going to get a lot of value from. And his name is Doug Casey of Casey Research, legendary investor, one of the greatest personalities and authorities in the gold space. And dare I say, Doug was born for a moment to articulate what is happening right now in 2020. His blog can be found at internationalman.com. He's polishing his latest book, Assassin. And you know Doug's a best-selling author and someone who produces amazing, incredible books, author of Crisis Investing and Speculator. So it's a very powerful time to be speaking to Doug Casey himself. Doug, thanks for coming on Crush the Street with me today.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I'm speaking to you from sunny Uruguay, close to the beach. Well,
it must be a great distraction, at least, to be there by the beach, because we do seem to be living in an alternative universe. I want to remind my listeners to visit my special reports at crushthestreet.com/virus from an A to Z update on what is going on at the moment. And if you care about what's going on in gold, which is performing spectacularly, visit crushthestreet.com/gold for that report as well. So Doug, the stock market is on track for its worst performance since 1931. The Fed and Congress are deliberating daily, and markets seem to ignore what they do. Steve Mnuchin said that he's admitting to a potential 20% unemployment rate. I mean, this is the man on this grandiose platform actually admitting this, and the world seems to be getting exposed to what is an alternative universe. What is your initial thoughts on all of this?
Well, on internationalman.com last week, I did a long interview on all my views on this type of thing. In a nutshell, I see the virus as being just another virus. We've had bird flu and swine flu, and I can't even remember MERS and SARS, a bunch of these things. There are thousands of viruses floating around the world. They come and go. Most of the time you don't notice them, even if they kill a few people and sicken more. The problem is not the virus itself. The problem are the second and third order effects of the virus. In other words, things that stem from hysteria about the virus. It's completely unnecessary, completely ridiculous. The best comparison could be made with the Spanish flu of 1918 and 1919, when in terms of adjusted population, the equivalent of like 1.2, 1.3 million people died, but life went on. And that's what would happen now if it hadn't been for the hysteria that's been involved from all sources, especially these idiotic governments that are closing down the economy. This is possible if you have a stable economy, but we don't. All the debt in the world can't be serviced. We're likely to see failing pension funds, collapsing insurance companies, a run on the banks. You can forget about the FDIC. I don't know where the bottom is for the stock market, but I can give you historical comparisons. And there's going to be a continuing panic into gold. So, sorry to rap for so long, but that kind of sums up my view on the situation.
100%. I mean, I told you before, I'm being ordered to stay at home now. Austin area, Travis County, Williamson County are ordering a stay-at-home law. 1/3 of Americans are now forced and in this stay-at-home mode. And we've seen Zika, H1N1, Ebola, SARS, AIDS. And, you articulated a little bit about this one just being another virus. But obviously the response to this virus is so much different than what we've seen in the past. Literally, the whole economy is coming to a grind. And is there any sort of speculation as to why this one is being treated so much differently than some of the other ones in the past?
Well, we could talk about conspiracy theories, and generally speaking, I'm not a conspiracy theory fan, simply because it's hard enough uh, getting several close friends to agree on what movie, well, nobody goes to movies anymore, what restaurant to go to. So it's much harder to get the kind of miscreants that run governments to agree on locking the world down. Now, why is this thing important? Uh, the reason that it's important, in my opinion, is that the world has been on the cusp of what I've called the Greater Depression for a long time. Let's use the analogy of a hurricane. In 2007-8, we entered a gigantic financial hurricane. Since 2010, we've been in the eye of the storm. It's a giant storm, giant eye. Now we're entering the trailing edge of the hurricane, and it's going to be much worse and much different and much longer lasting than what we went through in 2008. But here's why it's important. This virus is just the pin that broke the bubble. In itself, it's not that important. The problem is these people are going to blame the Greater Depression. Now, we are going into a depression for lots of reasons that we can talk about. It's not just going to be a cyclical downturn or a recession. It's much more serious than that. It's not because of the virus. The virus is just the pin. The reason we're going into a depression is because the whole economy is unsound. It's rotten from the foundations up. Why? Because of government action, because of the actions of our central bank, the Federal Reserve, which incidentally serves no useful purpose in itself, but that could be a whole other discussion.
Stocks are basically back to where Trump started his presidency. They took the stairs up, although it seemed like it happened sort of fast in this blow off top here. But my goodness, they fell through the floor in 30 days, essentially reversing all of the Trump boom that we've seen. There is no global rainy day prep fund. I mean, there is no ability to absorb any sort of disruption that we're seeing in the economy at the moment. It does seem like a whole economy is very dependent on full operation and not partial operation. So maybe you could respond to that. And I do have one more follow-up to that.
Yeah, for many years, people have been aware of the huge amount of debt in the world. It's hard to put your finger on the number, but let's say there's a couple $100 trillion or more. And the problem with debt is that some people owe it to some other people. And when the economy slows down, some people aren't going to be able to pay the other people. This is called counterparty risk. So that's one reason why this depression is going to be much worse than the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. It's because of all the debt in the world. I don't know what these governments are going to do about that. Of course, they're the main debtors in the world to start with. There's all kinds of possibilities. It's quite possible that we're going to have a credit collapse type of depression to start with, like we had in the US in 1929. But because these people are printing up trillions and trillions of new currency units, not just in the US, but all over the world, it's likely to wind up like 1923 in Germany, but on a worldwide basis. And unfortunately, governments are much more powerful, and people expect more from them than they did the last time around. So this is really serious.
Doug, is there a difference between essential business and non-essential business to the effectiveness of our economy. And again, the Fed seems to be shooting blanks here with their attempts to support the system. And, they're trying to address every sort of facet of the economy. It's sort of like whack-a-mole. They address one thing, but then something else pops up. But, when you have in mind that people need to pay their mortgages, pay their rent, continue spending money, is there really a difference between essential business and non-essential business when it comes to the underlying support for our economy?
No, there isn't any difference, at least as far as the person that needs to earn his salary or tips or wages or whatever from the unessential business. It's pretty essential to him to have to pay for his groceries and rent. And actually, these people they're such idiots. People that call themselves economists today that have PhDs, they're not economists. They're really just political hacks, political apologists. Look, what's essential? The only thing that's really essential is the ability to grub for roots and berries like a caveman. So how low do you want to go? And who decides what's essential or not? These ivory tower intellectuals working for the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, incidentally, does not have any solutions to this problem. They are the problem. They're the ones that created the shaky banking system, the unsound dollar, and they're just compounding their error by creating even more money. So we shouldn't, look, people look to the government and look to the Federal Reserve to solve the problem. That is exactly the opposite direction to look. I mean, the Federal Reserve should be abolished and the US government should be pared down about 90%. They're responsible for most of this hysteria and the unsoundness of the economy. So I was just reading something the Barron's, shamefully, I subscribe to Barron's just because I like to know what these fools are thinking. And every article from their roundtable to all these things. Barron's used to be a bastion of free market thinking. No more. That was in the days of Bleiberg and Abelson, which ancient history. It's absolutely shameful. It's almost like they had members of the Politburo writing articles for Barron's today. This is the way the whole country thinks. So there's really not much hope that they're going to do the right thing.
Well, and we know that the Fed is admitting to having a blank check for whatever they feel the economy is going to need. And they actually, according to Neil Kashkari in a recent interview that's gone viral, they did not respond quick enough in 2008 and swift enough. And now they want to react with overwhelming force and be there for the economy in a much bigger and stronger presence than they were in 2008, claiming that they've now learned their lesson. And I'd like to read between the lines a little bit. It seems like they can't respond with what they did in 2008, and now they need even more injection of stimulus to even maintain the high that the economy once had. So any follow-up thoughts on that?
Well, what they did back in 2008, look, I didn't read this interview with this chap you mentioned, but it wasn't a question of responding too late or anything like that. They shouldn't have responded at all. They should have let the whole rotten structure collapse. Now, that's shocking that I say that, but why do I say that? It's because most of the real wealth in the world, the airplanes and the buildings and the skills that people have and the technology, that's not going to collapse just because the financial structure collapses. The real wealth is still going to be there. Yes, it'll change ownership, but most of the ownership of it today are people that have been basically cronies benefiting from government action and the streams of money the Federal Reserve has cranked out. So no, they weren't the answer back then. They did the wrong thing back. They have been doing the wrong thing almost since day one, starting most recently when Nixon devalued the dollar back in 1971. So, and yes, they have shot all the arrows in their quiver. So they're just going to double down on their past stupidity. I'd like to see unemployment go up, quite frankly, starting with the 10,000 economists that work for the Federal Reserve. These people should be waiting tables, not pulling levers in the economy.
Amen. Doug, gold has held up incredibly strong in this environment, back to 1650, and holding strong through this crisis, although silver has been decimated, the spot price, I would say, but catching a bid today, yesterday, and today. We know that mines are being shutting down due to the virus. American Silver, Equinox, Lundin, U.S. mints are out of supply. They're on back ordered if you can even get it. This is really gold's moment to do what it's going to do. And I mean, obviously it's holding up very strong when you compare it to other assets. But what are you expecting to see in this environment with gold? Do you expect it to go a lot higher, or is it performing the way you would expect it to perform?
Well, it depends on how bad the deflation is before these morons turn it into a runaway inflation. The answer to the question, however, is that gold is the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And in the world we live in today, where counterparty risk is immense everywhere, including at your neighborhood bank, that's counterparty risk on a local basis. Of course, there's a panic into gold. And if a gold mine can stay in production today, it's going to be very, very profitable. So after this initial hysteria blows over, the mining business is going to be making a lot of money. And I expect fund managers that still have some funds left to manage are going to be buying a lot of gold stocks. And the retail public will start buying more gold and silver coins, even though the premiums have risen from practically nothing to kind of ridiculous levels. But I've been buying these things for years. I have more than I know what to do with, and gold stocks too. So I expect gold to go much higher. Another reason I'll mention, Daniel, is that the U.S. isn't the only player in this game. For years, the Chinese and the Russians, in particular, have been buying a lot of gold. Why? Because they don't want to hold the unsecured asset of a bankrupt government. They don't want to have trades even between themselves and dollars clear through New York. That's crazy. So but they don't trust each other's yuan and ruble. So we're going to see gold reinstituted as a worldwide currency, first between governments and then on a daily level, as shocking as it is to say. Now, the question is, at what price will that work? Good question. In terms of today's dollars, I'll guess at least 3,000 an ounce. So I'm a bull.
Doug, we're seeing measures taken that, people would have thought were crazy, martial law type events, community lockdowns. And when we do have this deep recession, the Greater Depression, is it possible that we see some societal disorders, in your opinion, on Main Street with supply chain disruptions, people losing their jobs, unable to feed themselves and supply for their families? Already grocery stores have been cleaned out and people are unable to get fresh foods like milk and chicken and meats. And, hopefully you've been stocking up on some sort of granola bars, rice, beans, and other things that'll sit in your shelf for a while. But I guess what I'm asking is, in this moment, do you expect Main Street to be hit and a disruption in the fabric of our society beyond what we're seeing today?
It's entirely possible. We're experiencing a financial collapse. Okay, that's very bad, and it's going to get worse. Not necessarily all in 1 week or even 1 month, but for a long time, because what they're doing is the opposite of the right thing. And we're going to have an economic collapse also, for lots of reasons that we don't have time to talk about. And that's going to flip over into a political collapse. American society, in fact, most of world society, has become very, very politicized. over time. And they expect political solutions. So it's going to be political chaos. And it's going to go further than that. It's going to go into social chaos and demographic chaos and maybe military chaos, because they'll figure some way to blame some kind of nasty foreigner for our problems. So we're at a really big turning point, quite frankly. And we're still in the early days. I'm amused. I mean, traders can make a lot of money in a market like this. I'm not a trader. It doesn't interest me. It's very hard to do. Another story. But I know there are a lot of people that think they're very clever putting in bids on industrial stocks right now, figuring they're buying cheap. But I don't think so. Not counting what the dollar's worth, the numerara's for all these, the way you account for these things is screwed up. But I think the market could go down a lot further, because next earnings are going to collapse, and then next dividends collapse, and then next a lot of bonds are going to be defaulted on, and then you're going to have corporate bankruptcies, and then there's counterparty risk to the people that lent money to those and have. So this is, listen, it's just the first batter struck out in the first inning. So we're really early days. This is much more serious than 2008.
Doug, final question here, and just curious what your thoughts are on this. Already there was some sort of, anti-Chinese sentiment with, the way Americans feel China is treating them with trade and whatnot. And now you have this virus that started in China, and Americans, the whole world is looking at China like, hey, how did you allow this to happen, to like cause the whole world to come into this grind here? Obviously lots of opinions whether or not that's true or not, but do you anticipate an anti-Chinese sentiment to permeate the world in the next few years, in the short to midterm here?
Well, look, the idiots that are running governments all around the world, everywhere, they all think that World War II cured the last depression. It actually just made it longer and worse. Another story. We can't talk about that now. So yeah, the chances of a war, for lots of reasons, are quite good. And of course, the Chinese are likely first on the dance card. Although, believe it or not, the nature of this next war is likely to have a big biological component. I've been saying for years that F-35s and B-2s, this stuff is all crap. It's junk. It's like battleships and cavalry before World War II. So yeah, I think that's the real catastrophe, and it's not unlikely. Yeah, hold on to your hat. This is going to be something that you really want to watch on your widescreen from a safe location, not out your front window.
Doug Casey, everyone. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to learn more about you and your work, please let them know a little bit more about International Man, and also your books that you have coming out. A brand new book being released in July, Assassin. Please let everyone know about this.
Yeah, I do urge everybody to go to internationalman.com. It's a free blog. We'll send it to you for free every day. And it has great articles every day, actually. I don't say it just because it's my blog. It really is good. So go to internationalman.com and go to Amazon and buy a copy of Speculator, which is the first of a series of 7 novels reforming unjustly besmirched occupations. Our hero gets involved in a mining fraud and a bush war in Africa in number 1. Number 2, he becomes a drug lord. Now he's an assassin, showing that an assassin can be a good guy. It's a morality tale, incidentally. It'll be out in July. So Amazon has these things, and I think you're in for a very good read. So thank you for the opportunity to make a commercial.
Thank you, Doug, for coming on the show today and sharing your years of wisdom with us. And it's definitely something worth putting on your big screen TV, watching this crisis play out. Again, not necessarily the coronavirus crisis, but the bubble that is being deflated in this moment. So thank you, Doug.